and welcome to another episode of Untamed Unfiltered. I'm Amanda Nicholson.
And I am Aaron Provencio, and today we have two incredible guests, and that's Marley Crawford and Raina DeFonza. How's it going today, everybody?
Good. I'm good.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. For anyone else who's joining us and hasn't seen the first set of Untamed Unfiltereds this season, this is our post-show discussion where we get to dive a little bit deeper into each episode topic. So today we are talking about outdoor ethics. And I guess we've decided that Raina and Marley are the most ethical people that we know.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, so outdoor ethics are a set of personal and community principles that we choose to abide by, which kind of allows us to protect and enjoy the outdoors responsibly. But before we get into all of that, would the two of you mind introducing yourselves again and telling us a little bit about what you do?
I'm Raina. So if I'm not familiar to you, I did used to work at the Wildlife Center in outreach with Amanda and Marley. Aaron, I did not get a chance to work with you, but I'm glad to know you now. I guess high level, I work in natural resources communication. So right now I'm working in forestry communications.
Hi, I'm Marley. I'm the Development Associate at the Wildlife Center. I've been here since September 2018.
Well, while I'm sure that you guys are both very ethical, I think Aaron and I, were talking about this episode and realized we could probably have a whole host of people on here because of all of the people that we work and hang out with. I think we all just have this love of the outdoors. So I'm wondering if you each can share a little bit more about maybe what inspired your love of the outdoors and what sort of outdoor recreation do you do the most of? Are you hiking, birding, taking photographs, kayaking, all of those things?
I think my appreciation for nature and spending time outdoors probably started when I was really young. I lived in a pretty urban area in Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, and I would visit my aunt who lived in what we called the country. Her house backed up to the woods and a stream, and I would spend time in the summer with her, and I would spend hours, the whole day really, just playing in the stream and collecting crawfish and salamanders. And I could spend hours doing that without getting bored. And I loved it. I loved the quiet. I loved being in the water. I loved exploring and finding new things. So I think that's where my appreciation really first developed.
I grew up about an hour south from here in a really small town, so there's not much to do there other than do things outside, especially when you're a kid and you can't drive yourself around places. And there was this creek behind my backyard, so I also collected crawfish or whatever. And yeah, we just grew up like climbing that mountain barefoot behind my house, or like going birding with my grandpa, just things like that. And then especially coming here, like certainly grew my love for the outdoors. And now I'm really into nature photography.
And to sort of piggyback off of that, I'm curious if there's a moment that you can identify or a time or an experience that brought you to the realization that being outdoors, spending time in nature comes with a certain number of responsibilities, that when you're outdoors kind of in that space, that you have to make sure that you're being conscious, because the decision that you make when you're out there can have effects on the space around you. So I'm curious if there was ever a time or a moment that brought that realization up to you.
All right, I don't have a great answer for this because I don't have a great answer. I don't think there was a moment or one experience that brought me to any sort of realization that being outside comes with responsibilities. I think that it's probably something that has evolved over time. I think there were some things when I was young that seemed pretty obvious, like caring about the animals that I saw, wildlife that I saw, not wanting to hurt them or bother them, but not really understanding what that meant or like how to be a good person outdoors. So I think it's just something that's evolved for me over time. And there wasn't really any particular moment.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of a specific moment, but I know that like when I started taking wildlife pictures, like as a teenager and stuff, I would always go in and Photoshop out like litter in the background and just trash in the background. And that like made me start realizing like this is like in every picture I take almost, like needs to be taken care of. And so obviously coming to work at the wildlife center, when I worked at the front desk, we had animals come in all the time that had trash like wrapped around them, fishing line, hooks and stuff like that. So seeing that firsthand really made me realize how bad it can get, like if we don't clean up after ourselves when we're out there. So yeah, I would say that probably.
Well, actually, coming back to something that Raina just said, but this is also for you, Marley. I'm really intrigued to hear both of you talk more about this notion of not wanting to bother the animals out there, something that Raina said of kind of having that feeling from a young age of like being out in nature, which is all around us, but not wanting to bother animals. And I'm wondering if that also comes up for you, Marley. I mean, I know you, I see how you run around and like, you know, delightedly look at these little spiders and frogs and moths and butterflies and all that. So I know that you also have this instinct of like not wanting to disturb them, but I imagine that also comes up in your photography that you're doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if each of you can say a little bit more about that, of where that notion comes from. I just like, it's definitely not something that everyone has.
I feel like my answer to this probably ties into an answer to a question that I think is coming later. So I don't know how you want to deal with this, but when years ago, the Wildlife Center, we did something called Hospital and Habitat. And there were these tours that involved the tour of the Wildlife Center, as well as hiking through the woods that are adjacent to the Wildlife Center through the George Washington Jefferson National Forest. So we would do these hikes with school groups typically. And during these hikes, it was a chance for me to really test out my own outdoor ethics. And without realizing it, I was passing it on to the kids that I was working with. And I think that when I think about how I define my own version of outdoor ethics, there were 3 words that I kept coming back to, and it was curious, aware, and considerate. So when I'm out in nature, I feel like it's really important to be curious and to explore your surroundings. But that means that you have to also be aware, pay attention to what's happening around you for a couple of reasons. One, that helps you be a better curious person, but it also makes you be a better considerate person. So I feel like when I was working with kids on these hikes, I wanted them to be curious and I wanted them to touch things and I wanted them to flip over rocks and I wanted them to look at the animals that we saw in the creek. And that bothered them. Like that was, of course, a bother to those animals. So you sort of start to weigh whether it's worth instilling a real appreciation for nature in kids or in adults, whoever, for them to have those up close experiences with wildlife, knowing that this giant predator is approaching the frog as you pick it up, or the salamander as you scoop them out of the creek. Like that's a bother. So it's all about these boundaries that you sort of have to dance around, I guess. And it comes down to maybe the individual circumstances. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I feel like the way I view it, and sometimes this comes back to bite me, but I think of every creature I see, I just like picture its life stages in my head. And they work so hard to get to adulthood. And so many creatures like insects, I really obviously, like you guys know, like spiders and stuff, but also like a frog, like Raina was talking about. I just think about how hard it was for them to get to that like stage of development. So when I'm like out there taking pictures of them or like walking around them, I like watch where I step. I don't want to get too close to disturb them because life is already hard enough for them out there with real predators. And like Raina said, they view us as predators too. And then also for photography, they'll hop away or they'll fly away if they're scared by you. So I usually just try to keep a distance because it's respectful, and that's how we are as people too. Like, we want to respect people's boundaries. So we should respect wildlife's boundaries. Just because they're unspoken doesn't mean they're not there. Yeah.
Marley, I think you made a great point too about the frogs hopping away or the birds flying away. So that brings into question being aware of how an animal might respond to stress, and what is your responsibility to know that if you're choosing to interact with them. So, you may not know very much about a certain kind of animal that you see in the wild, but so you may not know if, like, a bunny sitting perfectly still, you may read that as them being comfortable with your presence, but really they're probably just freezing because they're afraid. So it's hard to read the circumstances if you're not really familiar with the animals or the wildlife or nature around you. So I think when you go out into these natural places, it's probably our responsibility to be aware of those things before we head out.
Yeah. Going off of that, when I worked here at the front desk talking with the public every day, it was very interesting to see how many people thought that just because an animal was quiet or still or not trying to get away from them meant that they enjoyed, like, the petting or the cuddling, things that we know that wildlife don't like and they don't find soothing. So yeah, like you said, like a rabbit is going to behave a lot differently than a bird. Like, they can't escape as quickly. So yeah, I think a lot of people just aren't educated, and common sense says fight or flight, but not all animals are like that.
Those are all great points, and actually tie right into my next question, which is the subject of outdoor ethics can sound a little daunting, but I think as both of you were saying, we're not striving to be like this wonderful, perfect being that goes out in nature and then like glides above the forest floor and never touches anything. Because of course, if we're spending time, whatever, at a national park, at our local park, in our backyard, we are having an impact. It's just up to us to be aware and to minimize the negative interactions and impacts that we have. So knowing that we cannot all be perfect at all times, but that we can always take small steps to be better. What are some small actions that you guys take in terms of being a better person in nature?
Can we talk about dogs now? Okay.
Always.
Okay, great. Well, being a dog person, I have 2 dogs that I often take with me when I'm hiking or even just spending time out in my backyard. They're with me, and nature is all around. So I feel like as a dog person, they're essentially an extension of me when we're out together in nature, and they're my responsibility. So for me personally, I'm very curious what everyone else feels. I don't know if you have dogs, Erin, but I know that Marley and Amanda do or have had dogs. I'm curious what everyone thinks about our responsibility to keep dogs on a leash, to not let them run free. I think it's more responsible to have them on leash. I understand people that have the perspective of, like, my dog has great recall. I want them to be able to run around a little bit, but you can't control everything your dog does. You can't stop them from running off trail and trampling wildflowers or getting excited by a squirrel. So from my perspective, I think it's more responsible to have your dog on leash and with you. But I'm curious what everyone else thinks.
I definitely agree with keeping your dog on a leash. Not only obviously because they could run off and, like you said, trample wildflowers or bother wildlife, but also it's safer for your dog because you can't control wildlife either. Especially if you live in an area where there are animals that might be bigger than your dog. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, same. I know it's definitely tempting. I have 2 dogs. One always stays on the leash because she has to. She has terrible recall, and But the other one I know will stick by me. But when we're out in a national park or pretty much everywhere except for the off-leash dog park down for the road from our house, she stays on a leash because I worry about wildlife. We also don't know all of those other places as well as we do know our one place down the road. Though I've kind of battled with that too. At the dog park, it is a pretty large natural area. Fortunately, the portion of it that's off leash doesn't have any sort of like wildflowers or anything that they can like trample. It's kind of a big field that they mow. And my thought process there is that I'm okay with the off leash part there because that place is so heavily trafficked by people and their dogs that like I'm pretty sure that, you know, wild birds are not nesting in the middle of the field there that gets visited every singular day, even in the worst of weather, by people and their dogs. So that to me seems okay. But yeah, otherwise, keeping on leash is certainly safer for the dog, safer for wildlife, certainly safer. Although now, you know what, I have to reconsider this because just yesterday, I think we did a news story because apparently there's been a black bear spotted near the off-leash dog park. And that's kind of the big rule of thumb is when you're hiking in bear country, keep your dog on a leash because 9 out of 10 times the undesired interactions with bears and humans are typically when a dog is involved and they're off leash and they, you know, get the bear all riled up. So
especially right now since they all have cubs hanging around with them, so a lot of moms, protective moms.
Yeah, so lots to consider, but yes, that's a great point. What about you, Marley, for your small action?
Yeah, I'll go back onto the photography thing because if I'm on a hike, I'm stopping 30 times to take pictures. So the people that hike with me would vouch for me on this. I get in very weird angles to take pictures because I don't want to disturb anything. And so one thing that bothers me is that, especially with social media, Instagram, TikTok, mostly, but even Facebook, we're sharing pictures, especially from our hikes, like anytime we're outside. And I have seen people change landscapes or move things for their picture to look more aesthetic. So I definitely try not to do that, because, you know, people like you, if you move a log to sit on in your picture, it seems like not a big deal to you, but a lot of people, not people, a lot of creatures might call that log home. And that's something I never thought about when I was younger, but now that I work here and know, I do not mess with the landscape or anything to make a picture look better. So I would say probably just things like that. I just try to be respectful, like I said, mind my step, what I'm doing. Sometimes you got to climb a tree or hang upside down to get a good picture, but we're not going to change the landscape, mess with habitat.
How about you, Aaron?
Mine kind of goes off of what Marley said when she just said mind where you step, is that I very strictly adhere to trails. It's a big thing for me to stay on the designated paths when you're in parks, natural areas, whatever it is, because those trails were very intentionally put there for a reason by people who knew what they were doing. And getting off trail, especially when it comes to what is called social trails, which is where one person, you know, cuts off a switchback and goes, I'm just gonna go straight up this hill. I can see where the trail is. I'm just gonna shoot up this, it'll be real quick. And then the person following them goes, oh, that looks easier, I'm gonna do that too. And then 10, 15, 20 people down, all of a sudden you took what was a nice little pristine, you know, rock scramble or whatever, and all of a sudden it's a new trail that people are using up and down. And although that might be more convenient and cut off a whole minute and a half from your hike, that can affect, as Marley was saying, wildlife in a lot of different ways. You can trample flowers and different animal habitats, and really getting off trail and sort of just putting your big feet everywhere can have all sorts of unknown consequences to the area around. And it's one of those things where, is it really make that big of a difference for you to just walk where you're supposed to? I've never understood the need to cut across and to try to cut down on your time. Like, we're not racing anybody, or I don't think so. So for me, staying on trail and just trying to minimize the impacts that I have on those off trail spaces is really important. But what about you, Amanda? What's your little thing?
Oh man, I think those are all really great things. But one thing, I feel like sometimes when we in general talk about like, here's how you can help, sometimes items on that list are like, don't do this, don't do this. So I'm going to supply a don't do this. But thing that I do not do, also because I really just want to bring it up within the context of this, and that is not stacking rocks. And I really want to hear Raina and Marley go off on this. I've been with Raina before. I've seen stacked rocks like in streams at music festivals, and it's been a whole scene. And I know that people do this a lot, right? They take rocks, especially in stream beds, and they stack them. They make these beautiful sculptures and artwork with them of all these differently shaped rocks. There's photos taken of them, especially on social media. They can look very pretty, go off, Raina.
But you're ruining habitat. So there are enough, especially here in the Appalachian region, where we have this amazing diversity of amphibians that rely on these rocks in streams. They have their eggs underneath. When you move those rocks, when you stack them up all pretty, you're ruining a place for that amphibian, that salamander, to lay its eggs, to hide away from predators. It destroys habitat, and it becomes this like prolific problem, because when one person builds a cairn, we'll call them cairns, but not really what they are, because I think a true cairn gives you direction, and these are just aesthetic. But when they stack rocks, other people stack rocks. It like one begets the next one. So I was somewhere, I think I was with you, Amanda, probably, but we were with someone who didn't understand the problem of rock stacking. And we were like at a brewery or something nearby, and we watched this kid build a stack of rocks in the stream. And the person we were with was like, I don't get why you're so mad about this. And we were like, watch, the next kid that comes to the stream is going to build a stack of rocks. And that's exactly what happened. And it happened with kid after kid after kid. So it becomes this huge like landscape shaping event. So then what's your option? Your option is to go and knock those rocks down, which is, tedious and doesn't really solve the problem, because you've already shaped the habitat, you've already changed things. So it's a real problem in certain places, especially that have certain kinds of wildlife. Makes me very upset.
Yeah, I didn't know a ton about rock stacking until I came here. Actually, I was in Colorado last January, right before the pandemic, and saw one, and I took a picture with one that someone had built, and that one might have been a trail marker. It wasn't near a source of water, and it was near a trail, so that one could have been a purposeful one, or one with purpose, I should say. But yeah, I have seen a lot on hikes, especially in streams, and like Raina was talking about, we have an awesome range of amphibians here, different species that really rely on the rocks for habitat, whether it's for breeding or for hiding. And a lot of times, she was saying kids build them. I have seen kids knock them down very violently, and that also causes a disturbance, because then you're just dispersing, especially if they're big rocks. So yeah, I have seen that happen as well.
I also want to mention something as well, which is not necessarily a wildlife-centered result of rock stacking, but also I know out west, especially in the Southwest, cairns and kind of unregistered cairns can be really dangerous to hikers, because out there's certain trails that, whereas out here in Virginia, a designated trail is pretty easy to see. I mean, you're in a forest and there's a dirt path, like that's easy to follow. But out in places like the Grand Canyon and Canyonlands and that kind of the dry, real deserty, sometimes the only way to designate a trail is with those designated cairns at the state or national parks will actually build for recreationists to follow. And there's been cases where people have decided to build a cairn just to, for a cool Instagram post or whatever. And people can get lost and end up in really unfortunate situations because somebody wanted to make a cool art piece. And so for me, it's just one of those things where, again, if you don't need to interact with the stuff around you, then why bother in the first place? I guess just leave things the way they are.
I wanted to go back to something you said, Aaron, about not understanding why people choose to go off the path. And I feel like here it's very wet ground and people go out on hikes and they choose to not walk through the mud puddle and instead will walk around and break a new trail. And I forget where I was, but I saw a sign where the park basically just acknowledged their muddy trails. They were like, it gets muddy here. So we recommend that you just embrace it. And please don't walk around, don't make a new trail, just walk through the mud. So that goes back to one of the principles of leave no trace is before you go out into nature is be prepared. And if you're in a place that might be muddy or wet, just be prepared to maybe walk through a little bit of mud. It's just part of the experience and it's more responsible.
You're wearing shoes that are meant to get dirty. So
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, it's one of those things where, I mean, in my time as an environmental educator, one of some of my most entertaining experiences is giving a kid permission to get dirty, of taking a kid who's on a field trip and being like, you can go slide down that dirt slide if you want to, like that's, and they're like, what? And so really it's just, I feel like sometimes, I mean, how many times in your adult life do you get the opportunity to really just step in a mud puddle? I feel like if you're given that chance, step in that puddle, take that opportunity. But Raina, so you kind of brought up again, leave no trace, this LNT, which is a set of ethics that have kind of been an outdoor ethic that's been popularized by backcountry and wilderness backpackers and things like that. And it's pretty well known and pretty well popularized in kind of the outdoor recreation community. But I'm curious, for all of us here, if you had to kind of identify or define your personal outdoor ethic, what would that look like? Kind of what is your tagline for your personal ethic if you were trying to advertise it to the rest of the world?
Yeah, when you sent this question earlier before we talked and I had a chance to think about it, and the three words that I landed on were curious, aware, and considerate. And I was thinking through whether I had a chance to ever really like articulate that to anyone. And I do think I have, but indirectly. And I think that when leading kids on hikes as an environmental educator, I think indirectly I was teaching them what I thought was the best way to interact with nature. So I've said this probably many times before already, but curiosity to me is a huge part of being outdoors, and building your own personal ethic is like understanding what's going on around you. So when I was working with kids, I really encouraged them to engage their five senses. While most of the time it was four, I didn't really trust letting them taste a bunch of things, but the other four were safe. But I would encourage kids to flip rocks, to look for salamanders or crawfish in the creek, to break leaves off of trees and smell, especially sassafras. That's my favorite. I love the way it smells. It has a cool leaf. And then encouraging them to also be aware of their surroundings, and that engaging their five senses to really be connected with the outdoors. So we would do activities like pausing for 1 full minute, just sitting still and being completely silent. And how does that change how you interact with your surroundings? We would do things like walk like a predator, which they had to think through, like, how, if I was a predator, how would I be really quiet? How would it change if I was walking on these different surfaces, which really helps them to think through how they are physically impacting that space. So if they wanted to hear birds, or if one of their classmates wanted to hear birds, they couldn't be loud because all the wildlife would be scared away. They couldn't crunch the rocks really loudly. They had to slow down. And as we were engaging with the outdoors, being considerate of the people you're with and the people that will be there later. So if we flipped over rocks, flip them back. Don't just leave them flipped over. Put them back the way you found them. Don't take things that you find. So I don't know. That's sort of how when I sat down and really thought about it, that's sort of how I guess my ethic would be articulated. But it's really a lot of doing, I guess, to develop that.
I had an answer, but I'm gonna change it because of after hearing Raina's. One thing I want to bring up, I had a dinner etiquette class, like a one-time class in school. How cool would it be to have like environmental etiquette taught in school? Like the way Raina acted like she taught with kids and stuff. I never had like a teacher that taught me that kind of stuff. That would have been awesome. I wish that we taught that in schools. Yeah, I would say like learn and enjoy through observation only. Like if you're wanting to learn more about something, get a field guide about it, and go out and observe. Don't take things. Foraging is kind of becoming popular, like mushroom foraging, that kind of thing. So if you're gonna do stuff like that, I know here at the Wildlife Center, when we forage for our wild patients, we never take more than 1/4 of what's growing. That kind of thing. So just a lot of what Raina said, and if the way to improve yourself, you have to get educated, and you might have to educate yourself, because if you want to improve yourself, you're probably going to have to teach yourself and learn, and the best way to learn is going out and doing it. So we definitely don't want to discourage anyone from going out and scare them like with these outdoor ethics, but yeah, just like take a field guide, take an online course, take an in-person course, like just learn as much as you can, because the more you learn, the more you're going to respect it and understand it.
Yeah, I think my big ethic is kind of being a respectful guest. For me personally, the way I've always looked at it is that when I'm out in nature, whether I'm mountain biking or fishing or just hiking or just sitting still for a minute, which is a hard thing for me to do, but I'll do it, Raina. I'll do it for you. For me, I've always had this kind of sense of that I am a guest in this space. As human beings, obviously, we're connected to this greater environmental system. I say that all the time. Every single one of these episodes, I'm pretty sure I talk about this, that human beings, we're a part of this. We're not outside of it or separated from it. But as an individual person, when I choose to go out and be in Shenandoah National Park, or to be in any of these other wild spaces, or to be even in Bear Oak, which is a little natural area we got next to the Wildlife Center, just really trying to be a respectful guest. And the way I always talk to people about it is, if I was going over to my friend's house or my grandma's house, I'm not going to walk in, sit in her living room, eat a granola bar, and then throw the wrapper on the ground, and go into her bathroom and open up her medicine cabinet and throw all of her stuff on the ground and be like, oh my gosh, ibuprofen, that's crazy, and then put it on the ground, and then take a picture in her kitchen and then leave the back door open as I leave, right? So it's one of those things where, just for me, how would I want someone to behave if they walk into my house? Pack in, pack out, take the things that you brought with you, take only memories, leave, all that kind of stuff. But really I think just finding that respect for the space that you're in and really living in that and ensuring that you're behaving as a respectful guest, I guess, when you're in that space, is sort of my personal ethic when it comes to being outdoors.
I kind of love that you referred to yourself as a guest in nature, because if you have the mentality that like nature is your Airbnb and the host can leave you a review back, would nature give you a 5-star review like after you've been out in it? Isn't that what you should strive for? I'm going to start thinking that way.
The other thing that I'm hearing here, and I did not, Aaron asked for our like personal tagline or brand on our own ethic or whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not prepare for that.
Yeah, that was-
except for the fact that you guys pointed out a couple of things which to me sounds like the other important factor here is to model good behavior, because it sounds like humans as a social species are picking up our cues from one another. So whether you're taking that little shortcut off the path and then, like, you know, someone sees you do it and they follow behind, or you start stacking rocks and then, you know, someone else is like, oh, cool, that's a fun thing. Just be very aware of what you're doing and model good behavior for other people. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us this week. I think that we have covered so much, and I hope that everyone out there who is watching gets to spend some time outside, make good choices, model good behavior, and but certainly enjoy connecting with nature as well. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Raina. Thank you, Marley. And we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2